Cowboy finds an Apache woman sleeping in his stable, and little did he know she would be his. The sun was slowly sinking behind the distant hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. James, a lone cowboy, was riding back to his small ranch after a long day with his cattle. His horse, a sturdy chestnut named Rusty, trotted steadily along the dusty trail. The wind carried the dry scent of the prairie, mixed with the faint smell of wildflowers and the earthy aroma of the land. James had been on the plains most of his life, learning from his father how to care for the cattle, mend fences, and survive the harshness of frontier life. He was a quiet man, thoughtful and patient, and though he had lived many years alone, he had grown comfortable with his solitude. As he approached his stable, he noticed something unusual. A faint glow flickered from inside, like the light of a small fire or lantern. James slowed Rusty, squinting into the dim light. He had checked the stable before leaving that morning, and he was certain it had been empty. His heart quickened slightly, a mix of curiosity and caution filling him. He guided Rusty closer, his hand instinctively moving toward the rifle slung across his back. When he reached the stable door, he nudged it open slowly. The creak of the hinges echoed in the still evening air. Inside, James froze. There, curled up on a pile of hay, was a young woman. Her dark hair was loose and tangled, falling across her shoulders, and her clothes were worn and dusty, evidence of a long journey. She slept peacefully, unaware of the cowboy standing just a few feet away. Her face, calm and serene in sleep, carried a quiet strength, as if she had endured hardships that James could barely imagine. For a moment, he simply watched her. He had heard stories of people wandering the plains, of travelers and strangers who sometimes sought shelter where they could. But he had never expected to find anyone in his stable, and certainly not someone who seemed so out of place, yet so composed. There was something about her presence that was different. She did not appear afraid or panicked. Instead, there was a kind of quiet dignity in the way she rested. James felt a strange mix of emotions, surprise, concern, and a growing curiosity. He glanced around the stable, noting that the doors had been locked when he left that morning. How had she gotten in? And why? He did not rush to wake her. Instead, he stepped back, closing the door gently so as not to disturb her sleep. He took a moment to think, pacing slightly in the soft glow of the lantern light. He could call for help or alert the local sheriff, but something told him that might frighten her. He had learned over the years that rushing into a situation often made it worse. Patience, observation, and careful thought usually brought better results. Deciding to act cautiously, James returned to his house briefly to prepare some food and water. He brought back a small wooden bowl filled with fresh water and a few pieces of bread and cheese. Setting them near the hay where she slept, he stepped back into the shadows of the stable, watching from a distance. The woman stirred slightly but did not wake, her breathing steady and even. James realized that she had been traveling for days, perhaps longer, and that she needed rest. His instincts, honed from years of caring for both animals and people, told him that showing kindness without demanding anything in return was the best approach. Night fell fully, and the stars began to twinkle above the prairie. The air grew cooler, and James felt a chill despite his heavy coat. He built a small fire just outside the stable, close enough for warmth but far enough not to alarm her. Sitting by the fire, he kept a quiet watch, occasionally glancing toward the stable door. He thought about the stories his father had told him about travelers from distant lands, about the Apache and other tribes who knew the land well and lived in harmony with it. He wondered if she was from one of those tribes, and if so, why she had come here. Questions filled his mind, but he did not press them. He knew that trust could not be rushed, especially with someone who had already endured so much. Hours passed, and the quiet sounds of the prairie filled the night. Crickets chirped, and the wind rustled through the tall grass. The woman remained asleep, and James found himself thinking about the life she must have led to bring her to this moment. He imagined the journey she had taken, the challenges she had faced, and the strength it must have required. In his years on the plains, he had learned to recognize courage, and he felt certain that she possessed it in abundance. Eventually, the woman stirred again, this time opening her eyes slowly. She blinked, taking in the dim light and the figure of James sitting by the fire. For a moment their eyes met, and James offered a small, reassuring nod. He spoke softly, careful not to startle her. "You're safe here," he said simply. "I won't hurt you." The woman's eyes searched his, measuring his words, reading the honesty in his gaze. She nodded slightly, still cautious but relieved to hear a voice that was calm and kind. James handed her the bowl of water and the bread, and she accepted it with a quiet gratitude. She did not speak at first, only eating slowly, as if tasting safety for the first time in many days. James watched her, feeling a protective instinct awaken within him. He had never met this woman before, yet he sensed a bond forming simply from the shared moment of understanding. As the night deepened, James and the woman remained in the stable, each respecting the other's space while slowly acknowledging a silent connection. He learned her name was Ayana, and she spoke it softly, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of her journey and the hope for a new beginning. James nodded in acknowledgement, careful not to overwhelm her with questions. They would speak more in the coming days, he knew, but for now, the simple act of sharing food and shelter was enough. Before leaving her to rest again, James checked the stable one last time. He adjusted the hay so she would be more comfortable and made sure the water was within reach. Then he stepped outside, looking up at the stars that stretched endlessly across the prairie sky. He felt a strange sense of destiny, as if this unexpected encounter was meant to happen. Though he did not yet understand the full story of the woman who had appeared in his stable, he knew one thing clearly. Life had just taken a turn he could not have predicted, and whatever came next, he would face it with patience, respect, and an open heart. That night, as the fire crackled gently outside and the wind whispered through the tall grass, James remained alert but calm. Somewhere deep inside, he felt a spark of something new, an unexpected adventure, a chance to protect and understand someone who had wandered into his life under mysterious circumstances. And somewhere, perhaps, Ayana felt it too, a quiet hope that, for the first time in a long while, she was safe, and that maybe, just maybe, this stranger on the prairie could become a friend, an ally, and something more in the days to come. The night passed slowly but peacefully, and as dawn began to break, painting the horizon with gentle shades of pink and gold, James knew that their story had only just begun. The cowboy who had discovered a stranger in his stable would soon learn that some encounters were meant to change a life forever, and this was one of them. The morning sun rose slowly over the plains, casting long shadows across James's small ranch. The sky was painted in soft shades of pink and gold, and a cool breeze carried the smell of dew-covered grass. James had already risen before the sun, as was his habit, checking on his cattle and making sure everything around the ranch was in order. But as he walked toward the stable, his mind kept drifting to the woman he had found the night before. Ayana. Her presence lingered in his thoughts, quiet but impossible to ignore. When he opened the stable door, he saw her sitting on the hay, brushing the tangles from her dark hair. Her movements were careful and deliberate, almost cautious, but there was a natural grace in the way she moved. She had noticed him immediately, her eyes alert but not fearful. James nodded politely, keeping his distance. He knew better than to approach too quickly. Trust could not be forced. "Good morning," he said softly, his voice calm. "I hope you slept well." Yana gave a small nod, and though she did not speak, the faintest hint of a smile appeared on her lips. James placed a fresh bowl of water and a small loaf of bread on the floor nearby. "You must be hungry," he said. "Take your time." For a moment she just looked at the food as if unsure whether she could trust it. Hunger, however, won over her caution. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, and James watched quietly, giving her the space she needed. He thought about how far she must have come, what hardships she had endured, and how strong she must be to survive on her own. It was clear she had been traveling for days, maybe even weeks, and he felt a protective instinct growing stronger inside him. After she finished, Ayana finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Thank you," she said. Her words were simple, but there was a depth to them, as if they carried not just gratitude but relief. James nodded. "You're welcome," he replied. "You're safe here, I promise." The two of them began to settle into a quiet rhythm. James continued his chores around the ranch, occasionally checking in on Ayana, while she stayed mostly in the stable. At first they spoke little, relying on gestures, glances, and the shared understanding that had begun to grow between them. It was a delicate balance, one that required patience and respect, but over time it began to feel natural. James left a small pile of firewood near the stable and helped her start a fire each morning. The smoke curled into the crisp air, a signal of warmth and safety. Iana, in turn, began to share small tasks with him, helping to feed the animals and gather water. She moved with quiet efficiency, showing a knowledge of the land and its rhythms that impressed James. He realized that, despite her youth, she was remarkably resourceful and intelligent. As the days passed, their interactions became more comfortable. Yana began to ask questions about the ranch, about the cattle, and about James's life. He answered as honestly as he could, telling her stories of growing up on the plains, of learning from his father, and of the simple joys and struggles of life in this remote place. She listened intently, sometimes nodding, sometimes tilting her head as if absorbing every detail. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, casting golden light over the fields, James noticed Ayana watching a group of wild horses in the distance. Her eyes followed their movements with a mixture of admiration and longing. "I used to ride like that," she said quietly, almost to herself. "In the hills near my home, we would race the wind and the earth." James smiled, understanding more than her words conveyed. "You'll ride here if you want," he said gently. "I can show you." Over the next week, they worked together to repair fences and prepare the land for the coming season. Each day, they learned a little more about each other. Iana's trust in James grew slowly, and with it, her comfort in this strange new place. James, in turn, felt a connection he had not expected, a bond that went beyond simple friendship. There was a quiet understanding between them, a shared recognition of loneliness, resilience, and hope. One evening, after a long day of work, James brought a blanket to the stable and sat with Ayana near the small fire. They talked more openly now, sharing stories from their pasts. Ayana spoke of her family, of the hills and forests she had grown up in, and of the life she had lost. Her voice was calm but carried a hint of sadness, the kind that comes from enduring more than anyone should. James listened without interrupting, offering only his presence and occasional words of comfort. "I have been alone for a long time," she said quietly. "I didn't know anyone would help me." James looked at her and nodded. "I know what it's like to be alone," he replied. "But you're not alone anymore. Not here, not with me." Her eyes softened, and for the first time she allowed herself to smile fully. It was a small gesture, but it carried the weight of relief and trust. In that moment, James realized that what had begun as an unexpected encounter in his stable was growing into something meaningful. The days turned into weeks, and the bond between them continued to strengthen. They learned to communicate without fear, using gestures, shared work, and quiet conversations to build understanding. James taught Ayana the ways of the ranch, showing her how to tend to the cattle, mend fences, and move quietly across the plains. In return, Ayana shared her knowledge of the land, teaching James how to find water, track animals, and read the signs of nature in ways he had never known. Their connection was subtle but undeniable. There was a sense of companionship that neither had experienced before, a feeling that they could rely on each other. James found himself thinking of Ayana often, imagining her smile, her quiet strength, and the calm confidence with which she faced the world. Ayana, in turn, began to see James not just as a protector, but as a companion who respected her, valued her skills, and treated her with dignity. One night, as the stars glittered overhead and the prairie lay quiet under the moonlight, they sat together in the stable, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for the future. Yana spoke of the life she wished to build, one filled with safety, trust, and freedom. James listened, offering encouragement and quiet support. For the first time in years, both felt a sense of hope that had been missing from their lives. Through small acts of kindness, shared labor, and mutual respect, their relationship blossomed. They learned to understand each other without words, anticipating needs and offering comfort in silence. The stable, once a place of surprise and uncertainty, had become a sanctuary, a place where both could heal, grow, and begin to trust again. By the time the first snow began to fall, coating the prairie in a soft, white blanket, James and Ayana had formed a deep connection. They had shared meals, laughter, quiet moments, and hard work. Each day had brought them closer, not through grand gestures, but through patience, understanding, and simple acts of care. The cowboy and the Apache woman, once strangers, now shared a bond that neither had expected but both cherished. James often caught himself watching her as she worked, marveling at her strength and resilience. Ayana, in turn, began to look forward to his presence, finding comfort in his calm demeanor and steady guidance. Together, they navigated the challenges of frontier life, learning that trust and connection were as essential as water, food, and shelter. By the end of the season, it was clear to both of them that their lives had changed forever. What had begun as an unexpected discovery in a stable had grown into a meaningful companionship. James no longer felt the emptiness of solitude as keenly, and Ayana felt a sense of safety and belonging she had not known in years. Together, they had begun to build something new, a life founded on trust, respect, and the quiet power of understanding one another. And though they did not yet know what the future would hold, both James and Ayana sensed that their journey together had only just begun. The bond formed in those early days of cautious observation and quiet care would shape the path ahead, leading them toward challenges, discoveries, and perhaps the beginnings of love that neither had expected but both would come to treasure deeply. The weeks passed slowly, and the seasons began to shift on the open prairie. The air grew cooler, carrying the crisp scent of approaching autumn. James and Ayana had grown more comfortable in each other's presence, their routines blending seamlessly. Each day began with chores, feeding the cattle, checking fences, and preparing food, and ended with quiet moments together in the stable or by the small fire outside. There was a rhythm to their lives now, a shared understanding that went beyond words. One evening, after a long day of work, a gentle rain began to fall, tapping softly on the tin roof of the stable. The sound was calming, like a lullaby from nature itself. Yana was sitting on the hay, her hands clasped around her knees, staring at the rain as it slid down the wooden walls. James brought her a blanket, draping it over her shoulders. She gave him a small nod of thanks, and for a moment they simply sat in silence, listening to the steady rhythm of raindrops. Finally, Ayana spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "I have never seen a place like this," she said. "The land, it is wide and free, but it is also lonely." James nodded, understanding more than her words could say. "The prairie is beautiful, but it can be harsh," he replied. "It teaches you to be patient, to respect what you have, and to understand that life does not always go the way you plan." She looked at him, her dark eyes reflecting the dim light of the fire. "And you, how do you live here alone?" he smiled faintly. I have learned to make the best of it. I care for the land, for the animals, and for myself. But it is not easy. Loneliness is part of it. That is why I am glad you are here. Yana's lips curved into a gentle smile. She could sense the honesty in his words, and a quiet trust began to grow between them. She had spent so long surviving on her own, relying only on herself, that the idea of someone caring for her without expectation was almost foreign. Yet here was James, offering not just food and shelter but respect and kindness. As the rain continued, Ayana began to share more of her story. She spoke of her childhood in the hills, of the close-knit community she had known, and of the family she had lost to circumstances beyond her control. Her voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of sadness, a quiet grief that had been with her for years. James listened patiently, never interrupting, allowing her to speak at her own pace. I had to leave, she said softly, her eyes downcast. There was danger and I had no choice but to run. I thought I would be alone forever. James reached out, resting a hand lightly on hers, offering a simple gesture of comfort. You are not alone anymore, he said quietly. Not here, not with me. Yana looked up at him, studying his face. There was something steady in his gaze, a calmness that seemed to promise safety. She felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of belonging she had not experienced in years. Slowly, she nodded, allowing herself to trust him, even if only a little at first. In the days that followed, their bond continued to deepen. They worked side by side, tending to the land and the animals, learning from each other's knowledge and experience. James admired Ayana's resilience, her ability to adapt and survive in ways he had never imagined. Ayana, in turn, began to see James not just as a protector, but as a companion, someone who respected her independence and valued her skills. One afternoon, while mending a fence near the edge of the property, Ayana paused to watch a herd of deer moving gracefully through the tall grass. James noticed her gaze and asked softly, "Do you miss your home?" She nodded, a shadow of longing in her eyes. "Sometimes. But I am learning that home can be more than a place. It can be where you are safe, where you are valued, where you belong." James smiled, understanding the truth in her words. "Then this can be your home," he said, "as long as you want it to be." The honesty in his voice touched her deeply. For the first time in many years, she felt the possibility of building a life that was not defined by fear or survival alone. There was hope now, a quiet but persistent hope that had been absent from her heart for far too long. As the weeks turned into months, James and Ayana began to share not just work and conversation, but moments of simple joy. They would sit by the fire in the evenings, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for the future. Ayana taught James how to identify the tracks of wild animals, how to find edible plants, and how to read the sky for changes in the weather. James, in turn, taught her how to care for the cattle, mend fences, and navigate the wide, open plains safely. One evening, after a long day of work, they both sat quietly in the stable, listening to the wind rustle through the grass outside. Yana turned to James, a serious expression on her face. "I have never had someone listen to me like this," she said softly. "Not just hear me, but truly listen. It feels safe." James looked at her, meeting her eyes with a steady gaze. "You deserve that," he said. "Everyone deserves to be heard, to be understood, and to feel safe. I am glad I can be that for you." Yana's lips curved into a gentle smile, and she reached out, taking his hand in hers. The simple gesture spoke volumes: trust, gratitude, and the quiet beginnings of affection. James felt a warmth in his chest, a recognition that their bond had grown into something meaningful, something neither of them had expected but both welcomed. As autumn deepened, the days grew shorter and the nights colder. James and Ayana adapted to the changing season, preparing firewood, securing the stable, and working together to ensure that the ranch was ready for winter. The shared labor brought them closer, creating a sense of partnership that went beyond simple companionship. They learned to anticipate each other's needs, to communicate through gestures and glances, and to rely on one another in ways that felt natural and comforting. One chilly evening, after a long day of hard work, James brought a blanket to the stable and offered it to Yana. She accepted it with a nod, and for a while they sat together in silence, listening to the wind outside. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but certain. "I have never felt this before," she said. "A sense of being cared for, of being understood. It is new to me, but it feels right." James squeezed her hand gently. "It is right," he said. "We are building something together, slowly, carefully. There is no rush, no pressure, just understanding, trust, and respect." Yana looked into his eyes, seeing the truth in his words. For the first time in many years, she allowed herself to believe that she could have a life that was not defined by fear or loneliness. She could imagine a future where she was safe, where she belonged, and where someone truly cared for her, not because of duty, but because it was the right thing to do. In the weeks that followed, their conversations grew deeper. Yana shared more about her past, the joys and sorrows she had experienced, and the dreams she still held for the future. James listened, offering guidance, encouragement, and understanding. Together, they began to imagine a life beyond the immediate challenges of survival, a life filled with hope, partnership, and perhaps even love. By the time the first frost dusted the prairie in silver, James and Ayana had formed a bond that was unshakable. They had learned to rely on each other, to communicate without fear, and to trust in the quiet strength they both carried within themselves. The cowboy and the Apache woman, once strangers brought together by chance, now shared a connection that was profound, built on patience, understanding, and shared experience. And though neither could predict what the future held, both sensed that their lives had changed forever. What had begun as a cautious observation of one another had blossomed into a deep trust, a quiet companionship, and the beginnings of a relationship that would endure through the trials and joys yet to come. The prairie was alive with the colors of early winter, the frost glinting in the early morning light, like tiny diamonds scattered across the grass. James had been up before dawn, tending to the cattle and ensuring that the stable and fences were secure. The world around him was quiet, the only sounds being the occasional crow cawing in the distance and the soft crunch of frost underfoot. Yana joined him shortly after, her breath visible in the cold morning air. She had grown stronger and more confident in her routines, moving efficiently through her chores while keeping a watchful eye on the animals and the land. Despite the chill, there was a warmth between them that neither had fully acknowledged aloud. Their silent companionship had deepened into a bond of trust, and every shared task, every careful glance seemed to reinforce it. James noticed how naturally Ayana had adapted to life on the ranch, how she moved with purpose and care, yet with an awareness of the dangers the prairie could hold. He admired her strength, her patience, and the quiet courage she carried within her. It was during this crisp morning that a distant noise reached James's ears. A faint but unmistakable clatter of hooves echoed across the prairie. At first he thought it might be the wild horses that roamed the plains, but as the sound grew louder, a knot of unease tightened in his stomach. Something about the rhythm of the hooves was deliberate, organized. It was no herd of animals, it was people. James instinctively signaled for Ayana to be quiet. They both paused, listening intently. Through the rising mist the figures became visible, 3 men on horseback, their faces grim, their movements purposeful. Outlaws. James had encountered trouble before, but never so close to home. He felt a surge of protectiveness rise within him, not just for his ranch, but for Ayana, who had become part of this life he had come to cherish. He whispered to her, "Stay inside the stable. Do not come out until I say it's safe." Yana nodded, her dark eyes steady and calm. There was fear, yes, but also a quiet strength that matched his own determination. She understood the stakes. They were in danger, and they would have to rely on each other to survive. James moved quickly but silently, positioning himself near the barn door where he could keep watch while remaining partially hidden. The outlaws drew closer, shouting demands for food, supplies, and any valuables they could find. James's heart raced, but his mind remained clear. He had faced danger before, and he knew that panic would only make things worse. Inside the stable, Ayanna crouched behind a stack of hay bales, her breath steady. She watched James from the corner of her eye, trusting him to lead. As the outlaws approached the barn, James stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "This is private property," he called out. "Leave now and no one gets hurt." One of the men sneered, spurring his horse closer. "We take what we want, old man," he shouted. "Step aside or things get ugly." James's hands tightened on the reins of his horse. He assessed the situation carefully. There were 3 of them, armed and aggressive, but they were not invincible. He had the advantage of knowing the land, and he had the support of Ayanna, who was more capable than they realized. Quietly, he signaled to her. Using a clever combination of distraction and knowledge of the terrain, they could outsmart the men without direct confrontation. Yana nodded subtly and moved with grace, slipping out of her hiding place to a position where she could create a diversion. Using her knowledge of the land, she kicked a small rock that rolled across the gravel, drawing the attention of one of the outlaws. The man turned, giving James the moment he needed to maneuver Rusty and block the others. James's heart pounded, but he kept his movements precise and controlled, using his voice to negotiate and his presence to assert authority. The outlaws were frustrated, unable to anticipate the coordination between the cowboy and the Apache woman. Gianna's quick thinking, her awareness of every sound and shadow, gave James the edge he needed. Gradually, he led them away from the barn, keeping them at a safe distance while making it clear that the land was defended. The outlaws, realizing that the ranch was not as easy a target as they had hoped, eventually retreated, grumbling and muttering threats, but leaving without causing serious harm. Once the danger had passed, James returned to the stable, his heart still racing but relief flooding through him. Iana stepped out from behind the hay, her expression calm, though James could see the slight tension in her posture. He approached her and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You were amazing," he said. "I couldn't have done it without you." Iana's lips curved into a small, proud smile. "We did it together," she replied. "We protected what matters." In that moment, James realized something he had not fully admitted to himself before. He had come to depend on her, not just for help but for companionship, for understanding, and for the quiet courage she brought to his life. Iana, too, felt the bond between them strengthen. The danger they had faced together had forged a connection deeper than friendship, a trust born of shared risk and mutual respect. The days that followed were quieter, though not without their own challenges. The outlaws had left, but James and Ayanna remained vigilant, knowing that life on the prairie was unpredictable. They worked together to repair any damage, reinforce fences, and ensure that the ranch remained safe. Every task became a reminder of their partnership, their ability to rely on each other in times of need. During a calm evening, after the adrenaline of the recent danger had faded, they sat by the fire outside the stable. The stars sparkled above, clear and brilliant against the dark sky. James handed Ayanna a cup of warm tea, and she accepted it with a grateful nod. They spoke quietly, sharing reflections on the events of the past days, but also speaking of hopes for the future, dreams of a life built on trust, safety, and companionship. Gianna leaned back slightly, watching the flames flicker. "I never thought I would find someone I could trust like this," she said softly. "Someone who sees me as I am, who respects me, and who stands with me." James looked at her, feeling a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. I feel the same, he replied. You are strong, clever, and brave. I'm lucky to have you here. More than lucky, I am grateful. The words lingered between them, unspoken yet powerful. They had faced danger together, learned to rely on each other, and found a quiet strength in their shared experience. It was a turning point, a moment when their bond became more than mere trust. It was something deeper, a connection that neither could ignore. Over the next few weeks, life on the ranch returned to its quieter rhythm, but the memory of the danger they had faced together remained. It had changed them, made their relationship stronger, and given them a shared understanding of the challenges and uncertainties of the world around them. They moved with confidence, their gestures and glances carrying unspoken communication. They had discovered that they were stronger together than they were apart. One cold morning, as frost coated the prairie and the sun rose slowly over the hills, James and Ayanna stood side by side at the edge of the property. They looked out over the vast expanse, the wind carrying the crisp scent of winter. James turned to her, a faint smile on his face. We can handle anything as long as we have each other, he said. Ayanna nodded, her dark eyes meeting his. Yes, she said softly, together. It was a simple statement, but it carried the weight of shared experience, trust, and a bond that had been forged in the quiet moments, the daily routines, and the extraordinary danger they had faced. They had begun as strangers, brought together by chance, but now they were partners in every sense of the word, companions who had learned to rely on each other, who had discovered courage, and who had begun to imagine a future together. And though the winter ahead would bring its own challenges, both James and Ayanna knew that whatever came their way, they would face it side by side. The danger had not only tested them but had strengthened the quiet connection between them. What had begun in the stable as a cautious and tentative trust had grown into something far more profound, a partnership, a friendship, and the beginnings of a love neither had expected but both welcomed with open hearts. Winter had fully arrived on the prairie, covering the land in a soft white blanket of snow. The cold was sharp in the mornings, biting at faces and hands, but inside the stable and the small ranch house, there was warmth, both from the fire and from the bond that had grown between James and Ayanna. Their days were busy with chores, as the animals needed extra care in the harsh weather, and the land required constant attention to remain safe and productive. Yet amidst the labor, there was a quiet joy in sharing tasks, stories, and laughter, a rhythm that had become their own. James had noticed more than once how naturally Ayanna adapted to the winter chores. She moved with a grace and confidence that had developed over months of learning and working side by side with him. Her skills had grown, not just in tending to the ranch, but in understanding the land, the weather, and the animals. James admired her deeply, not just for her abilities, but for her patience, courage, and the gentle strength she carried in every action. Ayanna, too, had noticed how James's care went beyond the practical. He watched her without judgment, valued her opinions, and respected her independence. In him, she had found not only a protector but also a companion, someone who offered understanding, trust, and quiet encouragement. She felt a comfort she had not known for many years, and slowly she allowed herself to imagine a life that was not defined by fear or survival, but by partnership, respect, and hope. One morning, as the sun rose over the frosty hills, James and Ayanna worked together to repair a section of the fence that had been damaged by the recent snowstorm. Their hands were numb from the cold, and the wood was slippery with frost, but they moved in sync, anticipating each other's needs. James handed her a hammer, and their fingers brushed briefly. The small touch sent a warmth through both of them, a quiet acknowledgement of the connection that had grown between them. As they finished the task, James stepped back, looking at her with a smile. "You've learned quickly," he said. "I don't know how I would have managed this winter without your help." Ayanna smiled back, her eyes bright. "And I wouldn't have done it without you," she replied. You taught me more than I could have imagined. It was not just about the chores or the survival of the ranch. It was about the shared trust, the understanding, and the unspoken support that had developed between them. They had faced dangers, shared hardships, and learned to rely on each other in ways neither had expected. Their partnership had become the foundation of something far deeper than simple friendship, a bond built on respect, trust, and the quiet growth of affection. As the days passed, they continued their routines, but now there were moments that carried a new meaning. They would sit by the fire in the evenings, talking about their dreams, laughing over small stories from their pasts, and sometimes just enjoying the silent comfort of each other's presence. Yana shared memories of her childhood in the hills, the beauty of the land she had known, and the family she had lost. James listened with patience and empathy, offering words of comfort and understanding. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned brilliant shades of orange and purple, James and Ayana stood together outside the stable, watching the last light fade over the snowy fields. The world was quiet, save for the soft whisper of the wind through the trees. James turned to her, his breath visible in the cold air, and said softly, "I never thought I would find someone I could trust, someone who understands me the way you do." Iana looked at him, her dark eyes meeting his. "I feel the same," she replied. "I have never felt this before. Safe, understood, and valued for who I am. With you, it feels like I finally belong somewhere." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning and honesty. James took her hand gently, feeling the warmth of her skin despite the chill in the air. "Then let's stay together," he said. "Not because we have to, but because we want to, because we choose to." Iana squeezed his hand, a small smile forming on her lips. "Yes," she said softly, "together." From that moment, their relationship deepened in ways that were both natural and profound. Their bond had been forged through trust, shared labor, and facing danger together, and now it blossomed into love. It was quiet, steady, and strong, a love built on understanding, respect, and the shared experiences that had brought them together. They did not need grand declarations or elaborate gestures. Their connection was evident in every glance, every shared task, and every moment of mutual care. Winter passed, and the first hints of spring began to appear on the prairie. The snow melted slowly, revealing the soft green shoots of grass beneath. The air grew warmer, carrying the scent of blooming flowers and fresh earth. James and Ayana continued to work together, preparing the land for the coming season, planting, tending the animals, and rebuilding fences damaged by winter storms. Their teamwork was seamless, a reflection of the trust and partnership that had grown between them over the months. One morning, as they worked near the edge of the property, Ayana paused to watch a pair of wild horses running across the fields. "They are free," she said softly, almost to herself. "It is beautiful to see them like that." James watched her, feeling a quiet admiration. "Freedom is important," he said, "and so is choosing where you belong. You belong here with me if you want to." Yana turned to him, a gentle smile on her lips. "I do," she said simply. "I have found my place." Their life together settled into a comfortable rhythm. They shared meals, laughter, and stories. They worked side by side, facing challenges as they came, whether it was caring for the animals, repairing the land, or enduring unexpected storms. Each day strengthened their bond, and the trust and respect they had cultivated over the months blossomed fully into love. As the days grew longer and warmer, James and Hyana began to dream of the future. They spoke quietly of a life built together, of shared responsibilities, and of the joy they could find in each other's company. There was no rush, no need to force the future. They simply allowed it to unfold naturally, guided by their shared values and affection. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky was painted in brilliant shades of red and gold, James and Ayana sat together by the fire in the stable. They watched the flames dance, feeling the warmth and comfort of their shared presence. James reached for Ayana's hand, holding it gently. "I am grateful for you," he said quietly, "for your courage, your kindness, your trust, and your heart. You have changed my life in ways I cannot put into words." Ayana's eyes glistened with emotion. "And you have changed mine," she replied softly. "You showed me that trust is possible, that love can be gentle and strong at the same time, and that I can have a place where I belong." In that quiet moment, under the soft glow of the fire and the fading light of day, they understood that their journey together had come full circle. From the first unexpected encounter in the stable to the cautious trust, shared danger, and growing partnership, they had built a life together grounded in understanding, respect, and love. Spring fully arrived, and the ranch came alive with the colors and sounds of new life. The animals thrived, the land flourished, and James and Ayana continued to work side by side, each day deepening their bond. Their love was steady and quiet, not flashy or rushed, but enduring and strong, a reflection of the shared experiences and challenges that had brought them together. One sunny afternoon, as they walked across the prairie hand in hand, James paused and looked at Ayana. "I cannot imagine my life without you," he said. "You are my partner, my friend, and my heart. Will you stay with me always?" Yana smiled, her eyes full of warmth and certainty. "Yes," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Always." In that moment, under the wide-open sky of the prairie, surrounded by the land they had nurtured together, they knew that they had found something rare and precious. The cowboy who had discovered a lost and weary woman in his stable had, in turn, found a love that was steadfast, kind, and enduring. And the woman who had wandered into his life, uncertain and cautious, had found a home, a companion, and a heart that cherished her fully. Their story, which had begun with an unexpected encounter, had grown into a life built on trust, shared labor, and deep affection. They faced each day together, knowing that whatever challenges came their way, they would meet them as partners, as friends, and as lovers. The open prairie stretched endlessly around them, vast and free, but it was no longer lonely. Together, they had created a world of warmth, safety, and love, an enduring connection that would carry them through every season of life to come. And as the sun set on another day, painting the sky with shades of gold and crimson, James and Ayana sat side by side, hands entwined, hearts full, and souls at peace. Their journey had been unexpected, their beginnings uncertain, but their ending was clear. A life shared, a love discovered, and a bond that would last forever.